Most people think revenge is loud. They think it's screaming matches, broken vases, and public scenes. But the most dangerous kind of revenge is silent. When Clara walked out of that conference room, she didn't shed a single tear. She didn't beg Adrian to stay. She just adjusted her coat, walked into the elevator, and made one phone call that would change everything. 10 minutes later, her ex-husband wasn't just single. He was trespassing. This is the story of how a disregarded housewife didn't just take half. She bought the whole damn building. The air conditioning in the conference room of Blackwood and Associates hummed with a sterile, aggressive silence. It was the 42nd floor of the Rutherford Tower in downtown Manhattan, a building wrapped in glass and steel that looked down on the rest of the city with cold indifference. Inside the room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Adrian Sterling sat at the head of the mahogany table, checking his Rolex for the 3rd time in a minute. He wasn't nervous. He was bored. To him, this wasn't the end of a 10-year marriage. It was a transaction, a shedding of dead weight. He wore a navy bespoke suit that cost more than most people's cars, and his posture screamed of a man who believed he had already won. Next to him sat Jessica, his junior counsel, and, as the tabloids had recently discovered, his mistress. She tried to look professional, tapping a manicured nail against the thick stack of divorce papers, but the smirk on her face was impossible to hide. Across the table sat Clara. She wore a simple beige trench coat over a white blouse. No jewelry, save for the small diamond studs her grandmother had given her. Her hands were folded on her lap. She looked small in the oversized leather chair, exactly the way Adrian liked her, manageable, quiet, and insignificant. "Let's wrap this up, Clara," Adrian said, his voice smooth but laced with impatience. "I have a board meeting at 2. The terms are generous. You get the cottage in Connecticut, the Audi, and spousal support for 3 years. It's more than you deserve, considering you haven't worked a day in a decade." Mr. Blackwood, Adrian's senior attorney, pushed the document forward. "Sign here, Mrs. Sterling, and here. This waives your claim to Adrian's shares in Sterling Tech and any real estate acquisitions made post-separation date." Clara didn't look at the lawyers. She looked at Adrian. For 10 years, she had been the invisible force behind him. She had proofread his pitches, hosted his investors, and managed his temper tantrums when the stocks dipped. She had been his anchor, and he had cut the rope the moment he thought he could float on his own. "Is the pen working?" Jessica asked, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Do you need help understanding the big words, sweetie?" Adrian chuckled darkly. "Don't be cruel, Jess. Clara just needs a moment to process that her free ride is over." Clara picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen. The weight of it felt cold against her fingers. She didn't read the papers. She had already read them, memorized them, and found the loopholes Adrian's arrogance had blinded him to. But today wasn't about loopholes in the divorce decree. It was about something much larger. She uncapped the pen. The scratching sound as she signed Clara Hale, reclaiming her maiden name immediately, was the only sound in the room. "Done," she whispered. Her voice was steady, lacking the tremor Adrian had expected. She slid the papers back. Mr. Blackwood checked the signatures rapidly. "Everything seems in order. The divorce is finalized effective immediately upon filing, which my paralegal is doing electronically as we speak." "Excellent." Adrian clapped his hands together, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He looked at Clara with a pitying sneer. "Well, Clara, I'd say it's been a pleasure, but we both know that would be a lie. You have until the end of the week to move your things out of the penthouse. I'm having the locks changed on Friday." "I understand," Clara said. She stood up slowly. And Clara, Adrian added, pausing by the door, his hand on the brass handle. Try to find someone more. On your level next time. A librarian, maybe. Someone who likes silence. Jessica giggled, linking her arm through Adrian's. Come on, baby. We're celebrating at Le Bernardin. They walked out. They didn't look back. They didn't see Clara remain standing at the window, looking out at the sprawling city. Mr. Blackwood began packing his briefcase. You can take the service elevator down, Miss Hale. It's less busy at this hour. Actually, Clara said, turning around. Her eyes, usually soft and brown, were now hard as flint. I'm not leaving just yet. I have another meeting. Mr. Blackwood frowned, pausing with a file halfway into his bag. I'm afraid this conference room is booked for Sterling Tech business in an hour. You need to vacate the premises. No, Clara said. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed a number. I don't think I do. Excuse me? Blackwood scoffed. If you don't leave, I'll have security escort you out. Adrian owns this floor. Adrian leases this floor, Clara corrected him. He leases it from the Rutherford Group. Or rather, he did. She put the phone to her ear. Hello, Mr. Henderson? Yes, it's Clara. I'm in the building. Yes. The divorce papers are signed. The conflict of interest is gone. Execute the transfer. She hung up and looked at the confused lawyer. What transfer? Blackwood demanded, sensing a shift in the air pressure of the room. You should probably check your email, Mr. Blackwood, Clara said, pulling a chair out and sitting back down at the head of the table. And tell Adrian to cancel his lunch. He's going to want to be here for this. To understand the magnitude of the mistake Adrian Sterling had just made, one had to rewind the clock 6 months. Adrian believed he was a genius. He was the face of Sterling Tech, a logistics software company that was currently the darling of Wall Street. But Adrian was a spender. He liked leverage. He liked the appearance of wealth more than the stability of it. He had leased the top 3 floors of the Rutherford Tower for his headquarters, a prestigious address that cost him nearly $250,000 a month. He didn't know that the Rutherford Group, the old money family that owned the building, was quietly liquidating assets to cover a massive gambling debt incurred by their youngest heir, Tobias Rutherford. Clara knew. Clara knew because before she was Clara Sterling, the housewife, she was Clara Hale, the daughter of Arthur Hale, a forensic accountant who had taught her how to read a ledger before she could read a fairy tale. When Adrian came home drunk, bragging about his deals, Clara would stay up late, going through his briefcase. She checked the company accounts. She knew Sterling Tech was cash poor. She knew Adrian was 2 months behind on the rent for the office space, relying on the Rutherford family's disorganization to avoid eviction. 6 months ago, Clara had received an inheritance, not from her parents, who had passed away with modest means, but from her godmother, a recluse named Beatrice, who had invested in Apple in the 1980s and never touched it. The probate had cleared quietly. The sum was staggering, $45 million. Clara hadn't told Adrian. By then, the lipstick stains were already showing up on his collars. The late nights at the office were becoming blatant. She knew the marriage was over. She was just waiting for the right time to pull the trigger. She had approached the Rutherford estate through a shell company, Hale Holdings. She negotiated ruthlessly. The Rutherford family was desperate for quick cash to avoid a public scandal involving Tobias. They wanted to sell the building off-market. The price was high, but the leverage was perfect. Clara liquidated the portfolio, leveraged the inheritance, and prepared the buyout. But there was one catch. The Rutherford lawyers wouldn't sell to a company connected to a tenant if there was a potential conflict of interest. Specifically, a messy divorce involving the tenant's CEO. So, Clara had to wait. She had to wait for Adrian to serve her the papers. She had to wait for him to insult her. She had to sit in that chair and let him think he was winning, all so she could sign that document and sever the legal tie that prevented her from destroying him. Back in the conference room, Mr. Blackwood was staring at his iPad, his face draining of color. This can't be right," the lawyer stammered. "What is it?" Clara asked, her voice cool. She opened her handbag and took out a bottle of water. "A notification from the land registry," Blackwood whispered. "The Rutherford Tower. It's been sold." "To whom?" Clara asked, though she didn't need the answer. Blackwood scrolled down, his eyes widening. "Hale Holdings LLC." He looked up, his mouth slightly agape. "Hale. Clara Hale." "The ink is dry, Mr. Blackwood," Clara said. "I own the building. I own the lobby. I own the parking garage. And I own floors 40 through 42, where Sterling Tech currently operates." This is preposterous," Blackwood sputtered, standing up. "You can't do this. We have a lease. A binding commercial lease." "You had a lease," Clara corrected him. She reached into her bag and pulled out a blue folder, sliding it across the mahogany table. "Clause 14B of the Rutherford Commercial Agreement. In the event of a change in building ownership, the new owner reserves the right to renegotiate or terminate leases that are in arrears for more than 60 days. She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Adrian hasn't paid rent in 3 months," she said softly. "He's been shuffling funds to pay for Jessica's apartment in Soho. I saw the bank transfers." Blackwood looked like he was going to be sick. He knew exactly how precarious Adrian's finances were. If they lost this office, the image of success would shatter. The investors would panic. The stock would tank. "You're evicting us?" Blackwood asked, his voice trembling. "Oh no," Clara smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Eviction is too quick. I'm doubling the rent, effective immediately. And I want the back pay by 5 o'clock today, or I lock the elevators." "You can't be serious. Adrian doesn't have that kind of liquid cash." "Then I suggest he calls his investors," Clara said. "Or maybe he can return that diamond necklace he bought Jessica last week. I hear Cartier has a strict return policy, but maybe they'll make an exception for a desperate man." At that moment, the heavy oak doors burst open. Adrian stormed in, his face flushed red, Jessica trailing behind him, looking confused and annoyed. He had his phone in his hand. "What the hell is going on, Blackwood?" Adrian shouted. "My security pass didn't work at the executive elevator. The guard in the lobby said there's a new protocol. I had to take the service lift like a janitor." He stopped when he saw Clara. She was still sitting at the head of the table, exactly where he had left her. But something was different. She wasn't shrinking anymore. She was expanding to fill the room. "I thought I told you to get out," Adrian spat, stepping toward her. "Sit down, Adrian," Clara said. The command was so authoritative, so unlike the woman he had ignored for 10 years, that he actually froze. "Excuse me." "I said, sit down," Clara repeated. "We need to discuss your tenancy, and keep your voice down. I don't like noise in my building." "Your building?" Adrian looked at Blackwood, laughing nervously. "What is she talking about? Has she finally snapped?" Blackwood didn't laugh. He slowly turned the iPad toward his client. "Mr. Sterling, you'd better read this." Adrian snatched the tablet. His eyes scanned the legal notice, the transfer of deed, the LLC name, the signature at the bottom. Clara Hale, Director. The color left Adrian's face instantly, leaving him looking grey and old. "You," he whispered, looking at Clara with genuine horror. "You bought the tower?" "I did," Clara said. And we have a lot to talk about regarding the state of your office. The carpet in the hallway is atrocious. Jessica picked it out, didn't she? It has to go. Jessica was the first to break the stunned silence that filled the conference room. She looked at the iPad, then at Adrian's ashen face, and finally at Clara, who was calmly examining her fingernails. "This is a joke, right?" Jessica laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound that grated against the mahogany paneling. "Adrian, tell her it's a joke. She can't afford this building. She buys her shoes at Nordstrom Rack." Adrian didn't respond to his mistress. He couldn't take his eyes off his ex-wife. It was as if he was seeing her for the first time in a decade. The diffidence, the soft edges he had learned to ignore, they were gone. In their place was granite. "Clara," Adrian said, his voice finding a strained ridge of faux reasonableness. "Okay, you made your point. Very dramatic. Touché. Now let's undo this. How much did it cost? I'll get the board to authorize a buyback. We'll give you a 10% markup for your trouble. You can walk away with a nice little nest egg." Clara finally looked up. Her expression was mild, almost bored. "You seem confused, Adrian. I didn't buy the Rutherford Tower to flip it. I bought it because I like the view." "Don't lie to me." Adrian slammed his hand on the table, making Mr. Blackwood jump. "You did this to humiliate me. It's petty revenge because I traded up." Clara stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly graceful. She walked around the table, approaching where Adrian and Jessica stood. The scent of her perfume, something subtle, expensive, and unfamiliar to Adrian, wafted toward them. "You think this is about her?" Clara gestured loosely to Jessica without looking at her. "Adrian, I haven't cared about who warms your bed since 2018. This isn't about love. This is about business. Specifically, bad business." She turned to the lawyer, who was sweating profusely in his Italian suit. "Mr. Blackwood, what is the current outstanding balance on the Sterling Tech lease for floors 40 through 42? Blackwood fumbled with his papers, his hands shaking. He didn't want to read the number out loud, not in front of Jessica, not with Adrian glaring at him. But Clara was the landlord now. She held the keys. As of the 1st of the month," Blackwood stammered, "the arrears total $750,000, give or take a few thousand in late fees." Jessica gasped. "Adrian, $750,000. You told me business was booming. You bought me a Tesla last month." "Shut up, Jess," Adrian hissed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, ruining it. He turned back to Clara, his eyes pleading now. "Clara, look. We're having a liquidity pinch. It happens. The Q3 earnings are going to be massive. I just need a little breathing room. As the new owner, surely you want a stable anchor tenant." "I do want a stable tenant," Clara agreed, "which is why you are such a disappointment." She walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. "I know about the consulting fees paid to J. Miller Enterprises in the Caymans, Adrian. That's Jessica's shell company, isn't it? $50,000 a month funneled out of operating capital while you stiffed the Rutherford family on rent." The room went deathly quiet. Jessica took a subconscious half-step away from Adrian. Blackwood looked at the ceiling, praying for a fire drill. Adrian's face went from pale to a mottled purple. You hacked my accounts? That's a felony, Clara. I'll have you arrested." "I didn't hack anything," Clara said calmly, turning back to face him. "You left your laptop open on the kitchen island 4 months ago, when you came home drunk after the launch party. I'm just observant, and my father was a forensic accountant, remember? I know how to follow the breadcrumbs." She checked the slim silver watch on her wrist. "It's 1:50 p.m. Here is the new reality, Adrian. I'm invoking the insolvency clause. You have until 5 p.m. today to wire the full $750,000 in back rent to the building's escrow account. That's impossible, Adrian choked out. I can't raise that cash in 4 hours. Find it, Clara said coldly. Sell your stocks. Sell the Hamptons house. I don't care. But that's just step 1. She leaned against the table, crossing her arms. Step 2. As of tomorrow, your rent is doubling to $500,000 a month. You're paying below market rate for this zip code, and I need to recoup my investment. You're trying to bankrupt me, Adrian whispered. He looked small now, defeated. The bluster was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that the ground beneath him had dissolved. If Sterling Tech is as viable as you claim on CNBC, Adrian, then $500,000 a month should be a drop in the bucket, Clara said. If it's not, well then perhaps you shouldn't be occupying premium Manhattan real estate. She picked up her purse and headed for the door. Where are you going? Adrian demanded weakly. I have to meet with the building superintendent, Clara said pleasantly. We need to discuss changing the access codes for the executive elevators. Oh, and Adrian, if the wire doesn't hit by 5, don't bother coming in tomorrow. Your keycards will be deactivated. She opened the door, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. By the way, Jessica, Clara said, her voice smooth as silk. That Cartier necklace Adrian gave you? It's lovely. My grandmother had one just like it, before Adrian pawned it to pay for the seed capital for Sterling Tech 10 years ago. I always wondered where it ended up. Clara walked out, the heavy door clicking shut behind her, leaving the three of them in a silence heavier than lead. By 3 p.m., the 42nd floor of the Rutherford Tower was vibrating with panic. The sterile hum of air conditioning was replaced by the frantic murmur of hushed phone calls and the rapid-fire clicking of keyboards as analysts tried to move money that didn't exist. Adrian Sterling was locked in his corner office, the glass walls offering no privacy from the terrified stares of his employees. He was on his 5th call, his tie loosened, sweat staining the collar of his bespoke shirt. Arthur, listen to me, Adrian pleaded into his phone, pacing a groove into the plush carpet. He was speaking to Arthur Pendleton, the CEO of Apex Capital, his primary angel investor, and a man known on Wall Street as the Hammer. It's a temporary cash flow issue, a clerical error with the new landlord. I just need a bridge loan of $1 million to smooth it over until the Q3 returns come in. The voice on the other end of the line was gravelly and devoid of warmth. A clerical error? Adrian, my sources tell me your new landlord is your ex-wife, who you divorced 3 hours ago, and that she's threatening to lock you out of the building. That doesn't sound like a clerical error. That sounds like a vendetta. Adrian stopped pacing, staring blindly out the window. News travels fast, he muttered bitterly. When you occupy 3 floors of the most expensive real estate in the city, people talk, Pendleton said. I poured $20 million into Sterling Tech because I believed in the logistics algorithm. But if the CEO can't even manage his own rent, it makes me nervous, Adrian. Nervous investors pull their money. Don't pull out, Arthur. If you pull out, the stock crashes. We're days away from launching the 2.0 platform. Solve your landlord problem, Adrian, today, or I'm not just pulling out. I'm calling in my debts, and I'll strip that company for parts before I let you crash it into a mountain. The line went dead. Adrian stared at the phone, his hand shaking. He looked up to see Jessica standing in the doorway of his office. She wasn't offering comfort. She was holding a cardboard box filled with her personal items, a framed photo of them on a yacht, her collection of expensive hand creams, a potted succulent. Where are you going? Adrian asked, his voice hollow. I'm taking a personal day, Jessica said, coldly. She looked at him, not with affection, but with the calculating assessment of someone realizing they'd invested in a sinking ship. You need to fix this, Adrian. Clara isn't playing around. And frankly, if you can't handle her, I don't know how you're going to handle the board tomorrow morning. You're leaving me? Now? I'm protecting myself, she said, adjusting the strap of her designer bag, bought with his money. Call me when the elevators work again. She walked out, past the rows of nervous employees, and headed for the elevators. Adrian watched her go, realizing with a jolt of dark humor that Clara had been right. It was never about love. It was always about transaction. Down in the lobby, the atmosphere was entirely different. Clara sat in the building manager's office, a modest room behind the marble reception desk. The manager, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, who had worked for the Rutherford family for 30 years, was looking at Clara with newfound respect. The transfer is complete, Ms. Hale, Henderson said, sliding a set of master keys across the desk. We've updated the security protocols. As of 5:01 p.m., if the escrow account hasn't received the specified funds, the access cards for all Sterling Tech employees will be suspended. Excellent, Mr. Henderson, Clara said, pocketing the keys. Thank you for your efficiency. I know the Rutherfords were lax. Things will be different now. Indeed, ma'am. If I may ask, do you expect Mr. Sterling to pay? Clara smiled, a genuine, slightly sad smile. Adrian has spent his entire life believing he can talk his way out of consequences. He thinks math is a suggestion. He won't pay because he can't admit he doesn't have it. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It wasn't Adrian. It was an unknown number with a Wall Street area code. Clara answered. This is Clara Hale. Ms. Hale, my name is Arthur Pendleton, CEO of Apex Capital. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. The sharks were circling faster than she anticipated. Mr. Pendleton, I believe you own a significant portion of my tenant's debt. I do. Pendleton's gravelly voice came through clearly. I'm calling because I don't like instability in my investments. Adrian is panicking. He says you're squeezing him for back rent on the day of his divorce. It looks messy, Miss Hale. Emotional. Mr. Pendleton, if I were being emotional, I would have thrown his clothes out onto Fifth Avenue, Clara said coolly. This is purely business. Adrian Sterling is legally insolvent. He has been operating Sterling Tech using fraudulent accounting to mask personal spending. As the property owner, I am securing my assets. I'm sure a man of your reputation understands risk mitigation. There was a brief silence on the other end. Pendleton was recalibrating. He had expected a scorned woman. He found a CFO. Fraudulent accounting, you say? Pendleton asked, his tone shifting from aggressive to intrigued. I have the ledgers, Clara said. I'd be happy to share them with you. Provided, of course, we can come to an understanding. What kind of understanding? Adrian is finished, Mr. Pendleton. We both know that. The question is, who gets to pick over the carcass of Sterling Tech? You have the debt. But I have the building. He can't run his servers without my electricity. He can't access his files without my elevators. Clara leaned back in the creaky office chair. I don't want his money, Arthur. I want his company. At 5:00 p.m. sharp, a digitized tone echoed softly through the lobby of the Rutherford Tower. It was the sound of the building's security system resetting. Up on the 42nd floor, Adrian was still on the phone with a hedge fund manager in Greenwich, begging for a lifeline, when the overhead lights flickered and then cut out, replaced by the dim, reddish glow of emergency backup lighting. The hum of the server room, the heartbeat of Sterling Tech, died instantly. The silence that fell over the office was absolute and terrifying. Hello? Adrian? Are you there? the hedge fund manager asked through the phone. Adrian didn't answer. He lowered the phone, staring into the gloom. His employees were standing up in their cubicles, silhouetted by the red emergency lights, murmuring in confusion. "He did it," someone whispered. "She actually did it." Adrian stumbled out of his office and ran toward the elevator banks. He jammed his thumb against the call button repeatedly. Nothing happened. The digital floor indicator was blank. He slapped his security badge against the reader. A sharp, rejecting beep was the only response. He was trapped. Trapped in the expensive cage he had built for himself. 20 minutes later, the emergency stairs door opened. It wasn't security. It was Clara. She walked onto the darkened floor, illuminated by the flashlight app on her phone. Behind her walked Arthur Pendleton, a thick-set man in a charcoal suit whose presence radiated hostile authority. Adrian squinted against the light. "Clara, what have you done? Turn the power back on. You're destroying the company." "The company was destroyed months ago, Adrian," Clara said, her voice echoing strangely in the quiet office. "You just didn't notice because you were too busy buying jewelry for your assistant." She motioned to Pendleton. "You know Arthur, I believe." Adrian looked wildly between his ex-wife and his main investor. "Arthur? Why are you here with her? You're supposed to be backing me." "I back winners, Adrian," Pendleton growled, stepping forward. "Clara showed me the books, the real books, the Cayman accounts, the misappropriation of Series B funding. You're not just broke, son. You're looking at federal prison time for securities fraud." Adrian staggered back against a reception desk. "No. Clara, you can't. Why are you doing this?" "Why?" Clara repeated the word quietly. She walked past him, deeper into the darkened office, toward a large glass display case near the boardroom. Inside the case, illuminated by a small battery-operated spotlight, was a framed photograph of the original Sterling Tech founding team, 10 years ago. It showed a beaming, younger Adrian shaking hands with a brilliant, disheveled older man. Clara shone her flashlight on the older man's face. "Do you remember my father, Adrian?" she asked softly. Adrian frowned, confused by the sudden shift. "Arthur? Of course. He did our initial accounting. Nice old guy. Died a few years back, right?" "Arthur Hale was more than an accountant," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time all day. "He was a mathematician, a brilliant one. He spent the last 5 years of his life working on an algorithmic model for predictive logistics. He called it the Delphi Project." She turned the flashlight beam directly onto Adrian's face, blinding him. "When we got married, he trusted you. He showed you his notebooks. He thought you were going to help him bring it to market. Instead, when he got sick, you took the notebooks. You rebranded Delphi as the Sterling Logistics Engine, founded this company, and cut him out completely." Adrian put a hand up to shield his eyes. "Clara, that's ancient history. He never would have been able to monetize it. I did the hard work. I built the business. You stole a dying man's legacy." Clara's voice rose, cutting through the darkness. "You let him die thinking he had failed, while you bought penthouses with his genius. I stayed with you for 10 years, Adrian. 10 miserable years. Not because I loved you, but because I was waiting for the moment I could take back what you stole." She turned to Pendleton. "Arthur here agrees that the intellectual property theft is significant. He's agreed to buy out your debt and force a hostile takeover of Sterling Tech immediately, citing gross mismanagement and fraud." Pendleton nodded grimly. "Sign the surrender documents, Adrian. Step down as CEO tonight. We'll structure it as a resignation for health reasons. It might keep you out of jail if you cooperate and return the siphoned funds." And if I don't? Adrian whispered, cornered. Then I leave the power off, Clara said simply. By tomorrow morning, your servers will have melted down, your clients will have fled, and your stock will be worth less than the paper this divorce decree is printed on. And I'll still own the building. Clara placed a fresh stack of papers on the reception desk, right next to where she had signed the divorce papers only hours earlier. Your choice, Adrian. Walk away with nothing, just like my father did. Or go down with the ship. The silence in the reception area of the 42nd floor was heavy enough to crush a man, and Adrian Sterling was crumbling under its weight. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows against the walls. Adrian stood by the reception desk, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the granite counter. He looked at the documents Clara had laid out, the unconditional surrender of his life's work. Then he looked at Arthur Pendleton, the man who held his financial fate in his hands, and finally at Clara. You can't do this, Adrian rasped, though the fight had drained out of his voice. I built this brand. I am Sterling Tech. You are a liability, Adrian, Pendleton said, his voice grating like gravel in a mixer. I've already drafted the press release. We're framing this as a strategic restructuring. You get to keep your dignity, or you get an indictment. Clara is offering you a mercy you don't deserve. Adrian looked at the pen. It was a cheap plastic biro from the receptionist's cup, not the heavy Mont Blanc he had used to sign the divorce papers that morning. The symbolism was a jagged pill to swallow. What about my shares? Adrian negotiated weakly. I still owned 30% of the stock. Forfeited, Clara said, her voice devoid of negotiation. To cover the embezzlement of company funds to your personal accounts, we've calculated the total amount you siphoned for the penthouse renovations, the sports cars, and Jessica's consulting fees. It matches the value of your equity almost to the dollar. It's a wash, Adrian. She stepped closer, her eyes hard. Sign the papers, get out of my building, and we won't press criminal charges. Refuse, and Arthur calls the district attorney right now. Adrian's hand shook as he reached for the cheap pen. He felt the eyes of his employees on him. The developers, the sales team, the interns, peeking out from the darkened hallways, watching their visionary leader stripped bare. He scribbled his signature. It was messy, a scrawl of defeat. Done, Adrian whispered, dropping the pen. I hope you choke on it, Clara. Clara picked up the documents, checking them with the same forensic precision she had applied to his hidden accounts. She nodded to Pendleton. It's legally binding, she said. Pendleton took the papers and placed them in his briefcase. Smart choice, Adrian. Now get off the premises. Adrian straightened his jacket, trying to summon a shred of his former arrogance. Fine, I'm leaving. I'll call my driver. He turned toward the elevator banks, pressing the button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, harder. The panel remained dark. I told you, Clara said, her voice cutting through the gloom. The elevators are locked for non-personnel. And as of 30 seconds ago, you are trespassing. You expect me to walk? Adrian stared at her incredulously. It's 42 floors, Clara. Then you'd better get started, Clara replied calmly. I imagine it's a long way down. Plenty of time to think about where it all went wrong. This is petty, Adrian shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. You're just a bitter housewife playing CEO. Mr. Henderson, Clara spoke into her phone, ignoring Adrian's outburst. Please send security to the 42nd floor stairwell. We have an unauthorized visitor who needs an escort to the street. Two burly security guards, whom Adrian had walked past haughtily every morning for 3 years without a greeting, emerged from the stairwell door. They didn't look friendly. Mr. Sterling, the lead guard said, gesturing to the heavy fire door. This way, sir. Adrian looked around the room one last time. He saw the company logo on the wall, a logo he had stolen. He saw the people he had bullied. He saw the wife he had discarded. He turned and walked through the heavy door. The sound of his footsteps clanging against the metal stairs echoed back into the lobby. Clang, 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 fading away into the depths of the concrete shaft. Clara waited until the sound was gone. She took a deep breath, inhaling the stale air of the office, and then exhaled the last 10 years of her life. "Mr. Henderson," she said into the phone again, "you can turn the power back on now." A second later, the overhead lights blazed to life. The servers in the back room hummed back into existence, a rising crescendo of technology waking up. Computer monitors flickered on. The printer in the corner whirred. The employees stood there, blinking in the sudden brightness, unsure of what to do. Clara walked to the center of the room. She didn't shout. She didn't stand on a table. She just spoke clearly. "My name is Clara Hale," she announced. "For those of you who don't know me, I've been doing the accounting for this firm from my kitchen table for a decade. I know your names, I know your salaries, and I know that Adrian hasn't given the development team a bonus in 2 years while he bought a yacht." A murmur went through the room. "That changes today," Clara continued. "Mr. Pendleton and I are the new majority shareholders. There will be no layoffs. In fact, we are implementing a profit-sharing model effective next quarter. But there is one condition." She walked over to the wall where the large chrome letters spelled out Sterling Tech. "We are going to need a screwdriver," she said, a small smile touching her lips, "because we are changing the name." They say the best revenge is living well, but Clara Hale disagreed. She believed the best revenge was owning the floor your ex-husband stood on. When she walked out of the divorce settlement, she didn't cry, she didn't scream, and she certainly didn't beg. She simply signed the papers, checked her watch, and made a phone call that turned her arrogant ex-husband from a CEO into a trespasser in under 5 minutes. This is the story of a woman who was told she was worth nothing, only to reveal she had just bought the whole damn building. The air in the conference room on the 42nd floor of the Rutherford Tower was cold, but Adrian Sterling's smile was colder. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, checking his Rolex, looking every bit the master of the universe he believed himself to be. Next to him sat Jessica, his executive assistant, and the reason Clara was currently becoming an ex-wife. Jessica didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She was examining her manicured nails, occasionally whispering something to Adrian that made him chuckle. "Let's speed this up," Adrian said, sliding the heavy stack of divorce papers across the table toward Clara. "I have investors coming in at 2. The terms are final, Clara. You get the cottage in Connecticut and the Audi. I keep the penthouse, the stock options, and the company. It's generous, considering you haven't contributed a dime to Sterling Tech in 10 years. Clara sat quietly. She wore a simple beige trench coat, her hands folded in her lap. For a decade, she had been the invisible wife. She had hosted his dinners, managed his moods, and ignored the lipstick stains on his collars because she was waiting. Not for him to change, but for the right moment to strike. "Is there a pen?" Clara asked softly. "Here," Jessica said, tossing a cheap plastic biro across the table. It skittered to a stop near Clara's hand. "Don't press too hard, sweetie. The paper is expensive." Clara ignored the dig. She picked up the pen. She didn't read the terms. She had already memorized them. She knew exactly what Adrian was hiding. She knew about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. She knew Sterling Tech was bleeding cash to fund his lifestyle. But most importantly, she knew he was 3 months behind on the office rent. She signed her name. Clara Hale. She dropped the sterling immediately. "Done," she whispered. "Finally." Adrian stood up, buttoning his bespoke suit jacket. "Well, Clara, I'd wish you luck, but we both know you're going to need more than luck without my credit card. You have until Friday to get your boxes out of the penthouse." "I understand," Clara said, remaining seated. "Come on, Adrian," Jessica purred, linking her arm through his. "Let's go to Le Bernardin. We have something to celebrate." They turned to leave. They were halfway to the heavy oak doors when Clara spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped them in their tracks. "Actually, Adrian, you can't leave just yet." Adrian turned around, annoyed. "Excuse me? The meeting is over. You need to vacate the premises. This is a place of business." "It is," Clara agreed. She pulled her phone from her pocket and placed it on the table. "But it's not your place of business anymore. What are you babbling about?" "Mr. Blackwood." Clara nodded to Adrian's lawyer, who was packing his briefcase. "You might want to check the email I just sent you. It contains the transfer of deed for this property." The lawyer frowned, pulling out his tablet. He tapped the screen a few times, and then his face went drains white. He looked from the screen to Clara, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Adrian," the lawyer stammered, "you need to see this." "I don't have time for games," Adrian snapped, snatching the tablet. He read the notification. "Title transfer, Rutherford Tower. Sold to Hale Holdings, LLC. Owner, Clara Hale." Adrian laughed. It was a nervous, broken sound. "This is a joke. You? Buy the Rutherford Tower. You shop with coupons, Clara. You don't have $300 million. "I have an inheritance you never knew about because you never asked," Clara said calmly. "My godmother, Beatrice. She passed away 6 months ago. She left me everything. And since you just signed the divorce papers, waiving all rights to my future assets, the building is mine, solely mine." She stood up, and for the first time she looked tall. "And Adrian, as the new landlord, I'm reviewing the tenant list. It seems Sterling Tech is 90 days in arrears on rent. That's a breach of contract." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Jessica took a step away from Adrian, her survival instinct kicking in. "You're evicting us," Adrian whispered, the blood draining from his face. "No," Clara smiled. "Eviction takes months. I'm doing something faster. I'm invoking the insolvency clause. You have until 5 p.m. today to pay the $750,000 in back rent you owe. If the wire doesn't hit my account by then, I'm locking the elevators and cutting the power to your server room." "You can't do that," Adrian shouted, panic rising in his voice. "We have the 2.0 launch tomorrow. If the servers go down, the stock crashes. I'll lose everything." "Then I suggest you stop buying jewelry for your assistant and start finding some liquidity," Clara said coldly. "Oh, and Adrian? The rent is doubling tomorrow. The view from up here is expensive." Clara walked past him, brushing his shoulder. "I'll be in the building manager's office. Don't be late." For the next 4 hours, the 42nd floor was a scene of chaos. Adrian was locked in his office, screaming into his phone, trying to raise cash. He called every bank, every friend, every favor he had. But word travels fast on Wall Street. Everyone knew the golden boy of logistics was being squeezed by his ex-wife. No one wanted to catch a falling knife. By 4:45 p.m., Jessica had packed a box. She walked into Adrian's office, placed her keycard on his desk and said, "I think we should see other people." She walked out before he could even protest. At 5:00 p.m. sharp, the lights went out. The hum of the servers died. The air conditioning groaned and stopped. The entire floor was plunged into the dim, red glow of emergency lighting. Adrian slumped in his chair, defeated. He stared at his reflection in the darkened window. He was a king without a castle. 10 minutes later, the door to his office opened. Clara walked in, holding a flashlight. Beside her walked a large man in a grey suit, Arthur Pendleton, Adrian's biggest investor. "Arthur?" Adrian scrambled up. "Thank God, tell her she's destroying the investment." Pendleton didn't look happy to see Adrian. He looked disgusted. "Clara showed me the books, Adrian. The real books." Adrian froze. "She showed me the Cayman's account," Pendleton growled. "She showed me how you siphoned off the Series B funding to pay for your penthouse renovations. That's fraud, Adrian. Federal fraud." I was going to pay it back," Adrian stammered. Clara stepped forward, shining the light on the wall behind Adrian's desk, where a framed photo of the company's founders hung. "Do you know why I really did this, Adrian?" she asked softly. "It wasn't for the money, and it certainly wasn't for you." She pointed the light at the photo. "That man next to you, the old man you erased from the company history. That was my father." Adrian blinked, shielding his eyes. "Arthur Hale. He was just an accountant." "He was a mathematician," Clara corrected, her voice hard as diamond. "He wrote the source code for your logistics engine, the Delphi project. You stole it from him when he got sick. You promised him equity, then cut him out the moment he couldn't fight back. You built this empire on my father's grave." She dropped a stack of papers on his desk. "Mr. Pendleton and I have come to an agreement," Clara said. "He's buying out your debt. I'm taking over the assets. You are going to sign full control of Sterling Tech over to me right now." "And if I don't?" Adrian challenged weakly. "Then Arthur calls the FBI," Clara said, "and I leave the power off. You'll go to prison, broke." Adrian looked at the papers. Then he looked at Pendleton, whose face promised nothing but ruin. With a shaking hand, Adrian picked up a pen and signed his life away. "Get out," Clara said, taking the papers. "My driver is downstairs," Adrian muttered, straightening his tie, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "The elevators are locked, Adrian," Clara said, turning to walk out. "You'll have to take the stairs." "It's 42 floors." "Then you better get walking." Adrian Sterling walked down 42 flights of concrete stairs. By the time he reached the lobby, his legs were shaking, his suit was soaked in sweat, and his Italian leather shoes were scuffed. He pushed through the heavy fire exit door into the lobby. Security was waiting. They escorted him to the revolving doors without a word. As he stumbled out onto the rainy sidewalk, he looked back up at the tower. The lights on the 42nd floor flickered back on. He watched as the silhouette of a woman walked to the window, looking down at the city she now owned. 3 months later, the building had a new name. The sign above the door no longer said Rutherford Tower. It read, The Hale Building. Inside, the company was thriving. Clara had rebranded, instituted profit sharing for the employees, and finally given credit to the original creator of the code. She sat in the corner office, reviewing the quarterly earnings. They were up 200%. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Hale? There's a man in the lobby asking to see you. He says he has an appointment. A Mr. Sterling?" Clara didn't even look up from her spreadsheet. "Check the schedule, Leo. Is he on it?" "No, Mum." "Then tell him we're not hiring," Clara said, turning the page. "And Leo? Tell security to keep the lobby clear. We don't want any loitering." Clara Hale proved that you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. Sometimes, you just need to buy the venue. She took a broken marriage and a stolen legacy and turned them into an empire, leaving her ex-husband with nothing but a long walk down the stairs. It makes you wonder, who in your life is underestimating you right now? And what are you going to do about it? If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes revenge, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I release new stories every week, and you won't want to miss the next one. Thanks for watching.